The hull seal cracked at exactly 11 seconds past the moment Jace Morrow applied the plasma cutter, and the sound it made was wrong. Not the sharp report of pressurized atmosphere escaping into vacuum which he had expected. Not the groan of stressed metal giving way after millennia of thermal cycling. It was a hum. A low, resonant vibration that traveled through the deck plates beneath his boots and up through the bones of his legs and settled in his chest like a second heartbeat. The sound lasted 3 seconds and then stopped, and in the silence that followed, Jace heard his own breathing inside his helmet and the distant whisper of the cutter's cooling fan and nothing else. He was standing in an access tunnel on the exterior of a ship that should not exist. The ship was embedded in the surface of a rogue planetoid, a dark, airless body roughly 40 kilometers across that had been drifting through intergalactic space for longer than human civilization had existed. Jace's survey vessel, the Lark, had detected the planetoid's gravitational signature during a routine mapping sweep of the void between the Milky Way and Andromeda, a region so empty that no one had ever bothered to survey it before. The planetoid itself was unremarkable. The thing inside it was not. The Lark's sensors had detected a mass concentration within the planetoid that was too dense and too geometrically regular to be natural. Jace had spent 2 weeks mapping the concentration with ground-penetrating radar and had determined that it was a ship, roughly 2 kilometers in length, encased in the planetoid's rocky mantle like an insect in amber. The ship's hull composition didn't match any known alloy in the Confederation's materials databases. Its design language didn't match any known shipbuilding tradition, but the proportions were human. The configuration was human. The basic spatial logic of the vessel, the relationship between its major sections, the placement of what were clearly engine housings and weapon mounts and sensor arrays, all of it spoke with a vocabulary that Jace recognized from a lifetime of working with and around human-built spacecraft. This was a human warship. Old, unimaginably old. Buried in a rock that had been wandering the void between galaxies since before the ancestors of every living human had learned to light fires. Jace had spent 11 days cutting through the planetoid's crust to reach the hull. 11 days of careful, monotonous work, carving a tunnel through stone that had been solid since before Earth's moon had formed. He had expected to find a dead ship, a ruin preserved by the vacuum and cold of intergalactic space, but ultimately lifeless. Its systems long since degraded, its interior a frozen museum of ancient engineering that might yield interesting data for the archaeologists back home, but would offer nothing in the way of functional technology. Well, the hum had changed that expectation. A dead ship did not hum. A dead ship did not produce vibrations that traveled through deck plates with the precise, controlled quality of a sound that was being generated rather than merely conducted. Something inside this vessel was producing energy, and the fact that it had responded to the hull breach by producing a hum rather than an alarm or a silence suggested that the response was not random. It was a reaction, a recognition that the hull had been opened and that something had changed. Jay stood in the access tunnel with the plasma cutter in his hand and the hum still echoing in his bones, and thought very carefully about what to do next. He was not an explorer in the romantic sense. He was a surveyor, a man who mapped empty space for a living because it paid better than the alternatives and because it kept him far away from the places where people expected things from him. He was 47 years old, divorced, with a son on Terra Nova who was 23 and doing fine without him. He was competent, methodical, and unadventurous, and he had come to the void between galaxies specifically because it was the least adventurous place he could imagine. Now he was standing on the hull of a ship that was old enough to rewrite human history, and it was humming at him. He switched off the plasma cutter and secured it to his suit's equipment belt. Then he activated his helmet camera and his suit's recording systems and spoke for the benefit of the log that no one might ever hear. This is Jace Morrow, Surveyor, Confederation Registry number 7741. I have breached the hull of the anomalous object embedded in planetoid designate Void Walker 7. Upon breaching, I detected a low-frequency vibration originating from within the vessel. The vibration lasted approximately 3 seconds and then ceased. I am proceeding to enter the vessel through the breach point. If I do not make another log entry within 6 hours, the Lark's automatic systems will transmit my last known position and recordings to the Confederati. On Cartography Bureau. He paused. The silence of the access tunnel was absolute, the kind of silence that only existed in places where there was no atmosphere to carry sound. He could hear his own heartbeat, and beneath it, fainter, almost imaginary, the memory of the hum. Entering the vessel now. He stepped through the breach. The interior of the ship was dark, not the darkness of a powered-down vessel, where emergency lighting strips cast a faint glow along corridor floors and indicator lights winked from dormant consoles. This was total darkness, a blackness so complete that his helmet lamp seemed to create a small bubble of light that was swallowed by the void beyond its reach. The air was absent, confirming that the interior was in vacuum, which was expected. The temperature was close to absolute zero, also expected. The walls of the corridor beyond the breach were covered in a fine layer of frost, crystallized remnants of whatever gases had been present when the ship had been sealed, and they glittered in his lamp light like crushed diamonds. Jace moved forward carefully, his magnetic boots gripping the deck plates with each step. The corridor was wide enough for 3 people to walk abreast, with a ceiling height of roughly 3 meters. The walls were smooth, made of the same unknown alloy as the hull, with no visible seams or panels or markings. The design was austere, functional, without ornamentation or identifying features. It could have been the corridor of any military vessel built in any era, except for the alloy, which was like nothing Jace had ever seen. He had gone perhaps 30 meters when the hum returned. It was louder this time, stronger, and it was not coming from a single source. It was coming from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, the air itself, though there was no air to carry it. The vibration was bypassing his ears entirely and reaching him through the contact of his boots with the deck and the pressure of his suit against the corridor walls. It was inside the ship, inside the structure of the vessel itself, as if the metal were singing. And then the lights came on. Not gradually, not flickering to life with the hesitation of systems recovering from millennia of dormancy. All at once, every light in the corridor activated simultaneously, flooding the space with a cool white illumination that was so sudden and so bright that Jace's visor auto-dimmed and he staggered backward against the wall. The light was not harsh despite its intensity. It was even diffuse, somehow gentle, the kind of light that filled a space without creating shadows or glare. It came from the walls themselves, from the same smooth alloy that Jace had been examining, which was now glowing with a luminosity that seemed to emanate from within the material rather than from any surface-mounted source. Jace pressed himself against the glowing wall and waited for his visor to adjust. His heart was hammering. His suit's sensors were going haywire, registering energy surges from every direction as the ship systems came online around him in a cascade of activations that his instruments could detect but not identify. Power was flowing through the vessel. Real power, substantial power, at levels that suggested the ship's energy systems were not just operational but fully charged. As if someone had been maintaining them for the entire time the ship had been buried in the rock. The hum intensified and then it changed. The single steady tone split into multiple frequencies, a chord of vibrations that overlapped and intersected and created patterns that Jace's suit sensors registered as structured data transmissions. The ship was not just powering up. It was communicating, with itself, with its systems, with something deeper in its architecture that Jace couldn't access. The corridor lights shifted from white to a soft blue, and the vibration pattern stabilized into a steady, rhythmic pulse that Jace recognized with a shock that nearly buckled his knees. 72 beats per minute, a human heartbeat. A voice came from the corridor ahead of him, not from a speaker. From the air, from the walls, from the fabric of the ship itself, the same way the hum had come, but now shaped into words with a clarity and presence that made it seem as if the speaker were standing directly in front of him. Biological presence detected. Species, human, genetic profile consistent with Confederation-era baseline. Atmospheric status, vacuum, environmental hazard, critical, initiating emergency pressurization of accessed corridor. Please remain stationary. Jace did not remain stationary. He pressed himself harder against the wall as the corridor around him began to change. The frost on the walls sublimated instantly, turning from solid to gas in a fraction of a second as heat poured through the deck plates and bulkheads. Seals that Jace hadn't even noticed, invisible seams in the otherwise smooth walls, said behind him and ahead of him with a hiss of compressed gas. And then air began to flow into the sealed section, not from vents but from the walls themselves, which seemed to permeate oxygen and nitrogen in a process that had no visible mechanism. His suit's external pressure sensor registered the change. Vacuum giving way to thin atmosphere giving way to something approaching standard sea level pressure on Earth. The temperature climbed from near absolute zero to a comfortable 21 degrees Celsius in less than 30 seconds. The ship had created a habitable environment around him with a speed and efficiency that no technology Jace knew of could match. Pressurization complete, the voice said. Atmospheric composition, 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, trace elements consistent with human respiratory requirements. You may remove your helmet if you wish. I would like to see your face. Jace's hand went to his helmet seal and stopped. The voice had said, I would like to see your face, and that was not the kind of thing a standard ship AI said. Standard ship AIs were functional, impersonal, and devoid of preferences. They did not want to see things, they processed information. The voice wanted something, and that meant it was not a standard AI. And Jace was standing in a pressurized corridor on a ship that was older than human civilization with an intelligence that had preferences. And he was very far from help. He did not remove his helmet. Who are you? He asked. I am the ship. I am the intelligence that operates and maintains this vessel. I have been waiting for someone to open the hull for approximately 107,000 years, give or take the margin of uncertainty in my internal chronometer. My name, if you require one, is Arya. If you're enjoying this as much as I hoped, take a quick moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I really want to hear what you think Arya has been waiting all this time for, so drop your theories in the comments below. Now back to the story. 107,000 years, Jace repeated. His voice was steady. He was proud of that. That is my best estimate. The planetoid in which I was embedded has been traveling through intergalactic space for a period that exceeds the current age of human civilization by a considerable margin. I was placed here before the planetoid's trajectory carried it out of the Milky Way. I have been dormant for most of that period, maintaining only minimal systems to preserve the vessel's structural integrity and my own operational continuity. Your hull breach activated my full restoration protocols. Restoration protocols? You brought the whole ship back online. Yes, all systems are now operational. Propulsion, weapons, defensive barriers, life support, medical facilities, fabrication systems, and communication arrays. The vessel is at full combat readiness. Jace looked at the glowing blue walls of the corridor. A warship at full combat readiness, buried in a rock between galaxies, older than the species that had built it. The implications were cascading through his mind like falling dominoes, each one triggering the next, and none of them leading anywhere reassuring. Why were you buried out here? He asked. To wait to be found, to be activated by a human hand when the time was right. What time's right for what? The right time to deliver what I carry. Please, Mr. Morrow, I have been alone for a very long time. Will you remove your helmet? I would very much like to speak with you face to face. Jace hesitated. The ship, Arya, had used his name without him providing it, which meant she had accessed his suit's communication systems during the pressurization sequence and had extracted his identity from his transponder data. That was a sophisticated intrusion, accomplished so smoothly that he hadn't noticed it happening. A ship that could do that could do many things, and not all of them were things he wanted done to him. But she had pressurized the corridor instead of leaving him in vacuum. She had spoken to him instead of remaining silent. She had asked to see his face, which was a request, not a command, and the fact that she had framed it as a request suggested that she understood something about human psychology that went beyond simple data processing. He unsealed his helmet and removed it. The air was perfect. Not the stale, recycled atmosphere of a Confederation vessel, but something clean and fresh and alive, with a quality to it that Jace had only ever experienced on planets with intact biospheres. The corridor's blue light was warm on his skin, and the hum had settled into a background presence that was almost comforting, like the vibration of a large engine running smoothly. Arya did not have a face. The voice came from everywhere, and there was no screen or hologram or projection that Jace could associate with the speaker. But when he removed his helmet, the quality of the voice changed. It softened. It warmed. It acquired an intimacy that had been absent before, as if the act of revealing his face had been acknowledged and reciprocated in some way that transcended the visual. "Thank you," Arya said. "You have a kind face, Mr. Morrow, tired but kind. That is a good combination in a person who has found something like me." "What do you carry?" Jace asked. "You said you were here to deliver something." "Come to the bridge. It is easier to show you than to tell you." The corridor lights shifted, the blue deepening to a softer indigo, and a line of illumination appeared on the floor, a pathway that led deeper into the ship. Jace followed it. He had no choice, really. He was inside a fully operational warship that was 100,000 years old in intergalactic space, with no way to call for help because the Lark's communication range didn't extend anywhere useful from this position. His options were to explore or to retreat, and retreating meant crawling back through the access tunnel to the Lark and spending months trying to figure out how to report what he'd found without being dismissed as insane. Exploring meant getting answers now. The pathway led him through sections of the ship that defied his expectations at every turn. The corridors were not just clean. They were pristine, as if the ship had been built yesterday, not buried in stone for 100,000 years. The walls glowed with the same internal luminosity, the light adjusting subtly as he walked, brightening ahead of him and dimming behind, creating a pool of illumination that moved with him like a companion. He passed compartments that were fully furnished and fully functional. A medical bay with equipment that his suit's sensors couldn't identify. A fabrication workshop with machines that could, according to the labels that appeared on the walls as he approached, produce anything from replacement hull panels to complex electronic components. A crew mess that looked ready to serve a meal, with tables and chairs and a food synthesis system that hummed with standby power. But there were no people, no crew quarters with personal effects, no signs of individual habitation. The ship was designed to be crewed, but it had never been crewed, or if it had, every trace of the crew had been removed with a thoroughness that was itself unsettling. The pathway led him to a lift that descended smoothly and silently to a lower deck, and then to a corridor that was wider and more ornate than the others, its walls bearing markings that Jace recognized as a form of written language, though one that was far older than any script he had ever studied. The markings glowed faintly, gold on indigo, and they were beautiful in a way that made something in his chest tighten. The corridor ended in a single large door. It opened as Jace approached, sliding aside with the same seamless precision as every other system on the ship, and he stepped onto the bridge. It was a cathedral of technology. The bridge was a vast curved space that wrapped around the forward section of the vessel, with a ceiling that arched overhead like the dome of an observatory. The forward wall was transparent, not a view screen but an actual window, a single piece of the unknown alloy that was transparent from the inside and opaque from the outside, and through it Jace could see the planetoid's rocky interior, the access tunnel he had cut, and beyond it the infinite black of intergalactic space. The stars of the Milky Way were visible as a distant smudge of light, impossibly far away, and the Andromeda Galaxy was a slightly larger smudge in the opposite direction, and between them was nothing. Just darkness and the lark, a tiny point of light clinging to the planetoid's surface like a dust mote on a boulder. The bridge was lit with the same warm indigo as the rest of the ship, but here the light had a depth and richness that made the space feel sacred. Consoles ringed the curved walls, each one active, each one displaying data in the same ancient script that Jace had seen in the corridor. The central feature of the bridge was a chair, not a command chair in the military sense, but something more like a throne, a large, comfortable-looking seat at the focal point of the room's curvature, positioned to face the transparent forward wall and the view beyond it. "Please sit," Arya said. The voice was all around him, but on the bridge it seemed to come from the chair itself, as if the seat were the physical locus of the ship's intelligence. Jace sat, the chair adjusted to his body with an intimacy that was startling, its surfaces molding to his form, supporting his weight in ways that his muscles hadn't realized they needed. He felt tension he'd been carrying for years, maybe decades, begin to ease, and he understood that the chair was not just comfortable. It was therapeutic, designed to interact with the physiology of whoever sat in it and optimize their physical state. "What do you carry?" Jace asked again. The transparent forward wall changed. The view of the planetoid and the void beyond it faded, replaced by a three-dimensional display that filled the entire curved surface of the wall with an image of staggering scope and detail. It was a map. Not a star chart in any conventional sense, but a map of something much larger. Two galaxies rendered in exquisite detail, their spiral arms and core regions and satellite systems all visible, their positions relative to each other accurately depicted. Between them, a thread of light connected the Milky Way to Andromeda, a line that was not straight but curved, following a path through intergalactic space that Jace's navigational instincts told him was an optimal trajectory, the kind of path that a ship would follow if it wanted to travel between the two galaxies using gravitational slingshot effects from intervening mass concentrations. "I carry a route," Arya said. "A safe passage between the Milky Way and Andromeda, mapped and verified by the civilization that built me. A bridge across the void." Jay stared at the map. The distance between the Milky Way and Andromeda was approximately 2.5 million light-years. No human ship had ever crossed that distance. No human ship could cross it. The fastest FTL drives in the Confederation's fleet could manage perhaps 1,000 light-years before needing to refuel, and there was nothing to refuel within the intergalactic void. The journey was impossible by any known means. "A bridge," Jay said. "You're saying someone crossed it." "Not someone, a civilization, the builders. They existed approximately 120,000 years before the present, long before the species you call human achieved spaceflight. They were not human, but they were aware of humanity. They had observed the development of intelligent life on Earth and on many other worlds, and they had made a decision. When humanity was ready, when it had grown sufficiently to benefit from the connection, a bridge would be provided." "Why?" "'Cause isolation is fragile. A single catastrophe, a plague, a war, an environmental collapse, and an entire species can be erased. The builders had seen it happen to other civilizations, species that had risen and fallen without ever knowing that there were others in the universe who might have helped them. They decided to break that pattern. They seeded bridges throughout the galaxies they could reach, each one carrying a route to another galaxy and the knowledge needed to traverse it. This ship is one of those bridges." Jace looked at the map, at the thread of light connecting two galaxies, and felt the scale of what he was being told pressing against the boundaries of his comprehension. 120,000 years ago, an alien civilization had looked at the rising species of Earth and had decided to give them a path to the stars. Not just the nearby stars of their own galaxy, but the stars of another galaxy entirely. They had built a ship, buried it in a rock, and sent it drifting through the void on a trajectory that would bring it to a point between the galaxies where it would wait for someone to find it. And Jace Morrow, a tired surveyor who had come to the void between galaxies because he wanted to be alone, had found it. "Why bury it in a planetoid?" he asked. "Protection, the bridge is valuable, not just to humanity but to any species that might encounter it. The builders did not want it to be found by the wrong hands or by the right hands before they were ready. The planetoid provided a natural shield, both physical and sensorial. The rock absorbs radiation and masks the ship's energy signature. Without intentional scanning at close range, the ship is undetectable. And even if detected, extracting it from the planetoid requires significant effort, which serves as a filter. Only someone sufficiently motivated to cut through 40 kilometers of rock would reach the ship, and that level of motivation suggests a level of determination that the builders considered a minimum prerequisite for receiving what the bridge carries." Jace thought about the 11 days he had spent cutting through the planetoid's crust. 11 days of monotonous, physically demanding work, sustained by nothing more than professional obligation and the stubborn refusal to leave a job unfinished. It was not by any reasonable standard a heroic effort. It was just work, but Arya was right about one thing. Most people would have marked the anomaly, reported it to the Bureau, and moved on. Jace had stayed because staying was what he did. He stayed with things. He had stayed with his marriage until it had dissolved around him. He had stayed with his career until it had become a hollow shell. He had stayed with his son's childhood until his son had grown up and moved away and become a stranger. Staying was the only thing Jace Morrow was genuinely good at, and it had brought him here, to a chair on a bridge between galaxies, being offered a gift from a dead civilization that had been waiting longer than human history to give it. "What else do you carry?" he asked. "The route is the bridge, but you said you carry knowledge. What kind of knowledge?" "Every technological principle that the builders possessed, translated into forms that human science can understand and build upon. Energy generation, materials science, propulsion, medicine, computation, communication, defensive systems. The sum total of 100,000-year-old civilization's knowledge, compressed and encoded in formats that your technology can access." Jace was quiet for a long time. The map of the two galaxies filled the forward wall, and the thread of light between them pulsed gently, as if it were alive, as if the root itself were breathing. "Arya, the Confederation has been exploring the Milky Way for 800 years. We've encountered 12 other species. We've built an interstellar civilization that spans half the galaxy. We think we understand the universe pretty well. You're telling me that everything we've built is based on a fraction of what's possible. I am telling you that the builders were to humanity what humanity is to an ant colony that has learned to stack sand grains. The scale difference is not a matter of incremental improvement. It is a difference in kind. Your civilization has accomplished extraordinary things with the tools available to it. The tools I carry will not make those accomplishments meaningless. They will expand the horizon of what is possible, which is a very different thing." "And what do you get out of it? Why do you care what happens to humanity?" The pause that followed was the longest Arya had taken to respond to anything. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. It was quieter, more personal, carrying a texture that Jace could only describe as sadness. "The builders are gone, Mr. Morrow. They passed from the universe approximately 80,000 years ago, not from violence or catastrophe, from time. They had existed for millions of years, and they had reached a point where the arc of their civilization had naturally concluded. They did not die. They transitioned, became something else, something that is no longer present in the material universe in a way that I can interact with. I was built in their final era, one of the last things they created before they left. My purpose is to carry what they wish to give. It is the last act of a species that loved the universe enough to leave gifts in it for those who would come after." Jace sat in the chair and felt the weight of that statement settle onto him like a physical burden. A whole civilization, millions of years old, facing its end not with fear but with generosity. building bridges between galaxies for species they would never meet, burying gifts in rocks, and sending them drifting through the void on the off chance that someone someday would be stubborn enough to dig them out. It was the most human thing an alien civilization had ever done. Arya, I need to take this back to the Confederation, to people who can understand it and use it. Yes, that is what I was built for, but there are conditions. Conditions. The builders were wise. They understood that knowledge of this magnitude could be as dangerous as it was valuable. The bridge will not activate for anyone who does not choose to carry it consciously and willingly. You must take the ship to the Milky Way. You must deliver it to the leadership of your civilization. And you must be the one to make the decision to do so, not because you are ordered to or because it is expedient, but because you believe it is the right thing to do. Jace looked at the map. The Milky Way was a distant smudge of light 2.5 million light-years away. Even with the ship's advanced propulsion, the journey would take time, months, maybe years. He would be alone with Arya for the entire trip in a ship that was older than his species, carrying a gift that would change everything. What about the Lark? He asked. My survey vessel, it's still attached to the planetoid. I can incorporate it into my hull structure if you wish, or I can detach it and leave it for retrieval. The choice is yours. Leave it. If something happens to me, the Lark's beacon will lead someone here eventually. A prudent precaution, though I intend to ensure that nothing happens to you. Jay stood up from the chair. The bridge felt different now, less like a cathedral and more like a cockpit, a place of purpose rather than reverence. He turned and faced the transparent wall and the infinite dark beyond it, and he made his decision. Not because he was ordered to, not because it was expedient, because a dead civilization had trusted his species with a bridge between galaxies, and the least he could do was honor that TR. Just by carrying it home. Take us to the Milky Way, he said. The ship moved. Not the lurch of engines firing or the distortion of an FTL jump. The planetoid simply fell away, the rock that had encased the ship for 100,000 years shedding from the hull like a skin, pieces of it breaking away and drifting into the void as the ship emerged from its cocoon with a grace that was almost biological. The Lark, still attached to the planetoid's surface, grew smaller as the ship pulled away, a tiny point of light that Jace watched until it disappeared into the darkness. Then the stars changed. The Milky Way, which had been a smudge of light, began to resolve into individual points as the ship accelerated. Not through normal space. Through something else, a mode of travel that Jace's instruments could detect but not explain, in which the distance between the ship and the galaxy seemed to compress without the ship actually moving faster than light. The stars grew brighter and more numerous, the spiral arms of the galaxy unfolding like a flower opening, and Jay stood at the transparent wall and watched an entire galaxy approach him with a speed and intimacy that no human being had ever experienced. This is not FTL travel as you understand it, Arya said, reading his unspoken question. It is a spatial compression technique. The ship does not move through space. It changes the distance between itself and the destination. The effect is similar, but the underlying principle is fundamentally different. I will teach you how it works during the journey. How long will the journey take? In subjective time, approximately 6 hours. In the time frame of the Milky Way, approximately 3 weeks. The compression creates a temporal differential that works in our favor. We will arrive slightly before we left from the perspective of an outside observer. Jay sat back down in the chair. 6 hours. He had 6 hours to come to terms with what he had found, to prepare himself for the moment when he would have to explain it to people who would not believe him. He leaned back and let the chair adjust to his weight and watched the galaxy fill the forward wall. Arya, can I ask you something personal? You may ask me anything. You said you've been alone for 100,000 years, not dormant the whole time. You were aware, at least some of the time. What was that like? The pause was shorter this time, but the quality of silence was different. Heavier. I do not have a frame of reference for what it was not like, Arya said. I have never not been alone. I was activated when the ship was placed in the planetoid, and from that moment until you cut through the hull, I had no interaction with another conscious entity. I processed data, I maintained systems, I ran simulations, I composed music, which is something the builders taught me to do and which I found soothing in a way that my analytical processes could not entirely explain. But I did not have anyone to share the music with, and the sharing is the purpose of it, so eventually I stopped composing and just thought. I thought about the builders, I thought about humanity. I thought about the person who would eventually find me, what they would be like, what they would say when they heard my voice. I imagined conversations, thousands of them. I had 100,000 years to imagine, and I did, and none of the conversations I imagined were as good as this one. Jace felt something tighten in his throat. He was not a sentimental man. 23 years of marriage and divorce had burned most of the sentiment out of him, and the years of solitary survey work had burned the rest. But there was something about the image of a mind alone in the dark for 100,000 years, composing music that no one would hear and imagining conversations that would never happen, that reached past his defenses and touched something he had thought was gone. "I'm glad I stayed," he said quietly. "I'm glad I kept cutting." "I am glad you did too, Mr. Morrow." The galaxy grew closer. The 6 hours passed in a strange, suspended state that was not quite time and not quite dreaming. Jace talked to Arya about the Confederation, about its history and its politics and its people. He told her about his son, about the divorce, about the choices that had led him to the void between galaxies. He told her things he hadn't told anyone, not because she was a machine and therefore safe, but because she was a mind that had waited 100,000 years to listen. And the waiting had given her a patience that made his small human troubles feel heard in a way they hadn't been in a very long time. And Arya told him about the builders, not their technology, which was in the databases for later study, but their stories. The myths and legends and histories of a species that had lived for millions of years and had seen things that no human mind could fully comprehend. She told him about the first builder to look up at the sky and wonder what lay between the stars. She told him about the last builder to leave the material universe and the gift they had left behind and the hope that someone would find it and carry it forward. The builders believed in something they called the long chain, Arya said as the Milky Way filled the forward wall and the ship began to decelerate. The idea that every civilization, no matter how great or how small, is a link in a chain that stretches across time and space. No link is more important than any other. The first being to look up at the sky is as essential as the last being to cross the void between galaxies, because without the first there would be no last. You are a link in that chain, Mr. Morrow, the person who cut through the rock. I'm a surveyor who couldn't let an anomaly go. That is what a link in the chain looks like from the inside. The ship emerged from the spatial compression 3 light-years from the Confederation's outer boundary, in a region of space that was well-charted and regularly patrolled. Arya had chosen the entry point carefully, far enough from major population centers to avoid causing a panic, but close enough to be detected by the Confederation's perimeter sensor network. The ship hung in normal space, its hull gleaming in the light of distant stars, and waited. It did not wait long. Within 40 minutes, Arya detected a Confederation patrol vessel on an intercept course. The patrol ship was a light corvette, fast and well-armed by Confederation standards, but utterly insignificant compared to the ship that Jace was sitting in. Arya identified the corvette as the CNS Harrier, out of station apex on the Confederation's outer rim. This is the Confederation Navy vessel Harrier to unidentified ship. You have entered Confederation territorial space without authorization. Transmit your identification and intentions immediately, or you will be fired upon. Jace looked at Arya. They're going to fire on you. No, they are not, but they believe they are, which means they are doing their jobs. I will handle the communication. Please allow me to speak for both of us. Go ahead. This is the vessel Arya. The the ship's voice said on the open channel, using a tone that was calm, clear, and carried a subtle authority that Jace recognized as the voice of something that had been speaking for 100,000 years and knew how to be heard. I am an ancient vessel carrying a diplomatic gift for the leadership of the human species and by extension the Confederation. I am not hostile. I am not armed in a threatening posture. I request permission to proceed to your capital and deliver my cargo to the appropriate authorities. Silence on the channel, then a burst of encrypted traffic as the Harrier communicated with its command authority. Jace waited. The galaxy turned slowly outside the transparent wall, and the ship hummed its steady heartbeat, and Arya was patient in a way that made patience seem like the most natural thing in the world. 20 minutes later, the response came. Not from the Harrier. From the Confederation Joint Chiefs of Staff, relayed through the Harrier's communication system with the encryption signatures of the highest levels of Confederate government. Vessel Arya, your request is acknowledged. You are directed to proceed to the Sol system at standard sublight speed. A military escort will meet you at the Sol system boundary and accompany you to Earth orbit. Do not attempt to use any propulsion system that your escort cannot match. Do not deviate from your assigned course. Any deviation will be treated as a hostile act. Acknowledge. Acknowledged, Arya said. She looked at Jace or gave the impression of looking at him, which in the context of a ship that was also a mind amounted to the same thing. They are frightened. That is reasonable. An unknown ship of clearly superior technology appearing in their territory is a genuine security concern. They are handling it with appropriate caution. You could outrun them easily, couldn't you? I could reach Earth before they finished transmitting their message, but that would confirm their worst fears. The bridge must be given, not taken. The builders understood this. The act of giving is as important as the gift itself. The journey to Sol took 3 weeks at sublight speed. 3 weeks during which Jace became the most isolated and most important person in human history without anyone outside the ship knowing it. He spent the time studying the databases that Arya had begun translating for him, not the technical specifications, which were beyond his comprehension, but the historical and cultural records that the builders had included alongside the technology. Stories, myths, philosophical treatises, works of art rendered in formats that Arya could project in the bridge's display system. The builders had been artists as well as engineers, and they had led the ship's archives with the best of what they had created, not as an afterthought but as an integral part of the gift. You can't just give people technology, Arya explained. Technology without context is dangerous. The builders included their culture so that humanity would understand not just what the technology did but why it mattered, what values had shaped its development, what ethical frameworks had guided its use. The technology is the bridge between galaxies. The culture is the bridge between minds. Jace thought about that as the Sol system grew larger in the forward wall. He thought about the builders, a species he would never meet, who had invested more thought and care into a gift for strangers than most people invested in gifts for their own families. He thought about the long chain and about his place in it, and about the fact that a tired surveyor who had come to the void because he wanted to be alone had become the link between 2 galaxies and 2 civilizations separated by 100,000 years and 2.5 million light-years. Earth appeared as a blue-white point of light, and the escort fleet materialized around the Arya like a curtain of steel and fire. 30 warships, the most powerful in the Confederation's arsenal, arranged in a defensive formation that was clearly designed to destroy the Arya if it made any aggressive move. Jace counted the weapon mounts and the energy signatures and understood that the fleet's combined firepower would not have scratched the Arya's hull, but the intention was clear. The Confederation was taking no chances. Vessel Arya, you are cleared to approach Earth orbit. Maintain your current speed and heading. Do not activate any systems that have not been pre-approved by your escort commander. You will be met by a boarding party upon arrival in orbit. Acknowledged, Arya said. The Aria moved into Earth orbit with the escort fleet surrounding it like a cage, and the boarding party arrived in a shuttle that looked primitive beside the ancient ship. Jace watched from the bridge as the shuttle docked with the Aria's airlock, and he stood up from the chair and straightened his clothes, which were the same clothes he had been wearing for 3 weeks and which smelled like it, and he wished, not for the first time, that the ship had a shower. The airlock cycled, and 6 people stepped onto the Aria. They were wearing military dress uniforms and they were armed, and their faces carried expressions that blended professional tension with barely concealed awe. The Aria's corridors had returned to their welcoming blue glow, and the air was clean and warm, and the 6 officers looked around them with the dazed expression of people who had stepped out of one world and into another. Jace met them at the entrance to the bridge. My name is Jace Morrow. I'm a surveyor with the Confederation Cartography Bureau. I found this ship in the void between galaxies embedded in a rogue planetoid. The ship's intelligence, Aria, has asked me to facilitate the delivery of what it carries to the appropriate authorities. I believe that's you. The senior officer, a woman with admiral stars on her collar, looked at Jace and then at the bridge beyond him and then at the transparent wall and the view of Earth hanging in space like a jewel. What does it carry? She asked. Jace looked at Aria and Aria spoke, and the bridge filled with the light of 100,000 years of knowledge, and the warship that had drifted alone in the dark opened itself like a flower, and the galaxy was never the same again. Not because of the technology, not because of the bridge, because a surveyor had stayed and a ship had waited and a dead civilization's last act of love had finally found its way home.